The first Saturday morning in Oak Ridge Estates seemed almost too perfect. Sunlight spilled across neatly trimmed lawns, sprinklers hissed in rhythm, and the scent of fresh-cut grass lingered in the warm air. I was halfway through hanging a small wreath on my front door, a gift from my niece, woven from wildflowers, when the piece fractured. A shadow fell across my driveway. She was taller than I'd expected. In that way people seem when they move with certainty. Sunglasses hid her eyes, but the rigid line of her jaw was enough to telegraph her mood. Clipboard in one hand, phone in the other, she stood like an officer inspecting a suspect. "I'm Karen Jacobs," she said, her tone clipped, each word measured. "President of the HOA. I introduced myself politely. She didn't smile. "That wreath," she said, tilting her chin toward my door, "is not permitted under our color palette guidelines. Page 17, subsection C." The way she recited it, you'd think she'd memorized the bylaws for sport. I assumed it was a joke. I laughed lightly, but her lips compressed into a thin, bloodless line. "You have 72 hours to remove it," she continued, scribbling on her clipboard. "Failure to comply will result in fines. No neighborly welcome, no small talk. Just a verdict." She pivoted sharply and strode away, heels clicking on the pavement. 3 days later, an envelope appeared in my mailbox. Violation notice. $50 fine. I'd barely unpacked half my boxes, yet I was already on the HOA's radar. Neighbors began offering hushed warnings. She fined the Petersons for mismatched curtains. She made the Donnellys repaint their shed because the color was too cheerful. The more I heard, the clearer it became. Karen ruled Oak Ridge Estates like a fiefdom, and the HOA bylaws were her arsenal. Enforcement was selective, sometimes invented entirely. I tried reasoning with her once. She listened with the expression of someone waiting for an elevator, impatient, disengaged. Then she pointed to my recycling bin, declaring it too visible from the street, and slapped me with another fine. Her hypocrisy was galling. Karen's own lawn was patchy with weeds. Her trash cans lingered at the curb for days. A dent marred her mailbox. But nobody cited her. She was the HOA. The conflict might have remained a simmering annoyance if not for the barbecue. It was a small gathering, a few friends, soft music, the smell of grilled burgers drifting into the evening. Around 8 p.m., blue lights splashed across my driveway. 2 police officers stepped out, their expressions apologetic. "Noise complaint," one explained. They listened for a moment, glanced at my guests, and left without incident. But Karen had made her point. She could summon authority on a whim. The next morning, another notice arrived. Violation, disruptive social gathering. Fine, $150. That was the moment something shifted. I wasn't dealing with a petty neighbor anymore. I was facing a calculated misuse of power. And Karen thrived on the assumption that her targets wouldn't push back. What she didn't know was that my quiet exterior hid a career in litigation. Civil law, specifically property disputes, was my specialty. And I wasn't the only one in Oak Ridge Estates with a legal background. I began making discreet calls. Bill, the soft-spoken retiree next door, answered on the first ring. "About time someone did something," he said. She fined me for having my blinds open after sunset. Then there were the Petersons, both real estate attorneys. The Nguyen's, one of whom worked corporate counsel for a major property management firm. Piece by piece, the pattern emerged. Karen had spent years targeting the least confrontational residents, never realizing she was surrounded by people who knew exactly how to dismantle her authority. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, I stood at my kitchen window watching Karen's white SUV creep past my house. Her sunglasses caught the dying light, her silhouette framed like a sentinel on patrol. But the balance had already shifted. Every fine she issued, every fabricated violation, every unnecessary police call, all of it was becoming evidence. She thought she was tightening her grip on the neighborhood. She didn't realize she was wrapping the rope around her own neck. And when the time came, we would be the ones to pull. Karen's campaign of control intensified with unnerving precision. Each morning, her white SUV prowled the street at a crawl, as if she were surveying occupied territory. Her tinted windows reflected nothing, but you could feel the weight of her gaze, a slow, deliberate sweep from one property to the next. On Monday, a letter appeared in my mailbox. Violation. Unapproved landscaping. Fine, $75. The landscaping in question was my modest herb garden, barely 3 feet wide, nestled by the sidewalk. 2 days later, violation, unauthorized parking. Fine, $50. My friend's car had spent the night in my driveway while visiting from out of town. By Friday, violation. Non-compliant welcome mat. Apparently, home is where the heart is violated some arbitrary rule against decorative text. The notices accumulated like snowdrifts, each one petty, yet calculated. I filed them carefully, date-stamped and organized. Evidence, not clutter. One afternoon, I caught Bill next door retrieving his mail, his hands shaking slightly as he tore open an envelope. "She fined me for leaving my blinds open," he said, disbelief edging his voice. "Claims it's a privacy breach for the neighborhood." I frowned. "That's not a rule." He gave a humorless laugh. "Since when has that stopped her?" Stories like his circulated quietly, always in hushed tones. Retirees, young families, renters, anyone unlikely to fight back, bore the brunt of Karen's fines. Those in her inner circle escaped scrutiny entirely. Then came the hockey incident. It was a mild Wednesday evening, the kind where the air feels soft and the street glows amber under the setting sun. At the far end of the cul-de-sac, a group of children had set up a makeshift street hockey game. Their laughter carried down the block, light and harmless. Karen stormed from her house, as though responding to a burglary. Clipboard clutched tight, she barked at the children to disperse. When they hesitated, she pulled out her phone. Minutes later, a police cruiser arrived. The officers stepped out, their expressions caught between politeness and exasperation. One gently explained that the kids weren't breaking any laws. Karen waved a printed copy of the bylaws like a court summons. The game ended. Parents ushered their children home, glancing back with tight-lipped frustration. The street felt emptier for it. That night, I sent a single text. "We need to meet." By Saturday, my garage was filled. Bill was there, along with the Petersons, the Nguyen's, and several others I'd only met in passing. Each came armed with their own stories, absurd, infuriating, and all strikingly similar. "She fined me for having a garden gnome," one man said. "Mine was a bird feeder," added another. When the murmurs died down, I spoke. "I'm a litigation attorney. Civil disputes, HOA conflicts are familiar territory for me." The Petersons exchanged a glance. "We're real estate lawyers," they said in unison. Bill cleared his throat. "I was a judge for 30 years. Mrs. Nguyen leaned forward. "Corporate counsel. Property management." The room stilled. Realization rippled through the group. Karen had spent years targeting people she assumed were powerless, never realizing the street was lined with legal firepower. We began to plan. Step 1. Collect indisputable proof. Photographs of her own violations. Copies of selective fines. Records of her police calls. Step 2. Dissect the bylaws. We'd identify every vague clause, every outdated or illegal restriction, and prepare to challenge them in open session. Step 3. Coordinate. No single complaint, easily ignored. A united front, armed with procedure and precedent. Karen was about to learn the difference between ruling by fear and operating within the law. 2 days later, she gave us fresh ammunition. My garage radio, playing at a volume low enough to hear only inside, apparently qualified as an unauthorized public event. She called the police. The officer, the same one from the barbecue incident, leaned toward me after a brief check. "Between you and me, she's on thin ice. If you want to file harassment charges, I can help." I smiled. "I'll handle it." What Karen didn't know was that the battle she thought she was winning was already shifting beneath her feet. Every violation she issued now carried a second life, as an exhibit in the case we were quietly building. She believed her clipboard was a shield. She didn't see the cracks forming in it. The next HOA meeting was in 2 weeks. And when she called it to order, she wouldn't be the one in control. The HOA's monthly meeting had never drawn more than a handful of residents. That evening, the community center was standing room only. The air carried a low murmur, the kind that precedes a storm. Karen entered with her usual hauteur, clipboard under one arm, sunglasses perched like a crown. She paused, scanning the crowd as though they were unruly students awaiting discipline. "Let's begin," she said, sliding into the center seat at the long table. I rose from the back row. "Point of order," I called, projecting my voice just enough to cut through the chatter. Her gaze snapped to me. "This isn't the time." "It is," I replied, stepping forward with a binder thick enough to land with a satisfying thud on the table. Section 4.3 of the bylaws allows a resident to bring an item for immediate consideration with the support of at least 5 households. I have 23 signatures. Murmurs spread like ripples on water. I passed neatly collated packets to each board member. Contained within is a record of every fine, police call, and enforcement action taken over the past 12 months. Karen's smile was thin, her knuckles whitening around the pen in her hand. Bill leaned forward from the audience, voice steady. "This is selective enforcement. Some violations are fabricated outright." The Petersons added, "Furthermore, many of the bylaws cited are legally unenforceable. We have photographic proof that Mrs. Jacobs herself is in breach. Unapproved mailbox color, visible trash cans, unmaintained weeds." Karen's voice rose. "I've upheld the standards of this neighborhood for years." "No," I said evenly. "You've weaponized them." I opened the next section of the binder, my tone as methodical as a cross-examination. "We've documented instances where you've applied rules to certain residents while exempting others, without cause or board approval. You've called law enforcement for non-criminal matters, which constitutes harassment under State Statute 42.07. Her lips pressed together in a hard line. "This is nothing but a smear." Mrs. Nguyen, calm but unyielding, interrupted. "Our review of HOA filings revealed your annual corporate registration was never submitted last year. That means the HOA's legal standing to enforce fines has been void for 8 months. A sharp intake of breath swept the room. Karen's pen stilled. Bill's voice, firm with the weight of his judicial past, carried over the crowd. If this went before a judge, the HOA could be found liable for damages, both personal and collective. That liability could extend to you individually, Mrs. Jacobs. Even the board members who had once nodded along to her every word were now leafing through the packets, brows furrowed. Karen glanced between them, searching for support. None met her eyes. "This is absurd," she said, though her voice had lost its iron edge. "What's absurd," I replied, "is believing you could intimidate an entire community without consequence." I laid out the terms clearly. All pending fines rescinded immediately. No further police calls for non-criminal issues. An emergency election held in 2 weeks per Section 5.1 of the bylaws. Her resignation as president, effective tonight. She gave a brittle laugh. "You can't force me out." The Petersons spoke in unison. "Yes, we can. The bylaws allow removal by majority vote of present members. This room constitutes that majority." Hands began to rise. One after another. Dozens. Karen sat motionless for a moment, as if calculating an impossible escape. Then, with a sharp exhale, she dropped her clipboard onto the table. "Fine," she said, each syllable clipped. "You'll regret this." The door closed behind her with a finality that felt almost physical. The crowd exhaled as one, conversations erupting in relieved tones. Yet I remained standing, binder still in my hands. Removing Karen from the presidency ended her official power, but not her capacity for disruption. People like her didn't vanish, they schemed.
Bill caught my eye.
"She's not finished," he murmured. I nodded. "Neither are we. The real work, restitution, reform, and ensuring Karen could never return, was just beginning." Karen's resignation had shifted the air in Oak Ridge Estates, but victory was incomplete. She might have surrendered the gavel, yet her fingerprints were on every grievance, every dollar wrung from the residents under false pretenses. 2 nights after the meeting, We gathered again, this time in Bill's living room. Without the threat of her clipboard, people spoke more freely. The stories poured out, each more absurd than the last, but they all shared one truth. She had profited from fear. Bill's tone was measured, but his eyes were sharp. If we stop here, she walks away with everything she's taken. That's not justice. Mrs. Nguyen agreed. And if she can come back in any capacity, she will. We devised our counteroffensive in 3 parts. First, we restored the HOA's legal standing and rewrote its foundation. The Nguyen's filed the overdue corporate registration. Then we pushed through bylaw amendments. No fine without documented proof and board approval, quarterly audits by an independent committee, and a lifetime ban from office for anyone removed for misconduct. Second, we calculated restitution. My office drafted a demand letter on behalf of 22 residents, citing specific violations of state property law and demanding repayment within 30 days. The language was professional, the citations airtight, the intent unmistakable. Third, we prepared for escalation. If she refused, we'd each file in small claims court. Not one collective case, she could fight with a single attorney, but 22 separate suits, each requiring her time, money, and presence. Her reply was swift and petty. An email. "You people are unbelievable." A week later, her attorney sent a letter dripping with manufactured indignation. He argued her actions were in the best interest of the community and claimed repayment would be an admission of wrongdoing. We filed anyway. Within weeks, the consequences began to erode her facade. Neighbors saw her pacing her driveway, voice sharp over the phone. The gleaming SUV was gone, replaced by an older sedan. Rumor had it she'd taken out a second mortgage. One by one, cases settled. Quietly but on our terms. Residents received their money back, plus court fees. The relief was palpable. People smiled more, lingered on their porches again, let their kids play in the street without looking over their shoulders. Then we found the final weapon. While combing through old HOA records, the Petersons discovered a contract for road repairs awarded without competitive bids, signed by Karen. The contractor? Her cousin. Under state law, that was a textbook conflict of interest. We turned the evidence over to the state's HOA oversight agency. Within a month, she was under formal investigation. The result: a personal fine and a 5-year ban from holding any HOA position in the state. Karen wasn't just gone from Oak Ridge Estates. She was barred from every neighborhood she might have targeted next. Summer returned to the cul-de-sac. The sounds that had once drawn her ire, laughter, music, the thud of a hockey ball against pavement, filled the air again. Porches bloomed with colorful plants. Decorative flags waved freely. We still had rules, but they were applied evenly, transparently, and with the consent of the people they affected. The HOA had transformed from a tool of control into a framework for community. On a crisp autumn morning, I watched a moving truck idle in front of Karen's house. She emerged briefly, directing the movers with clipped gestures. She never looked toward my porch. As the truck rolled away, Bill stepped outside, coffee mug in hand. We exchanged a glance, not celebratory, not vengeful. Just a quiet acknowledgement that the street had been reclaimed. Power, I'd learned, is neutral until placed in the wrong hands. Then it becomes a weapon. The only safeguard is a community willing to stand together and take it back. Karen's story faded into neighborhood lore, told in low tones to new arrivals as a cautionary tale. Some details grew hazy, others exaggerated, but the core truth remained. She believed no one would stop her. We proved her wrong.